Sometimes, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day, the mind suddenly slows down, not because something dramatic happened, just a fleeting memory, a look that was once missed, a sentence that passed by too quickly. For Libra, moments like these are never loud. They arrive quietly, yet gently enough to make you wonder whether your silence once carried something that you hadn't noticed at the time. Not to blame yourself, not to search for what was right or wrong, just a brief pause to look back as you begin to sense more clearly the way your presence may have shaped someone else's emotional world. If you're here right now, chances are you've felt a moment like this before, and from that moment, a very personal stillness begins to open. And that's where we'll begin, right now. The most important moments in life rarely arrive in loud ways. They don't knock on the door. They don't ask for your attention. They simply appear, quietly, right when everything around you begins to slow down. It might happen while you're sitting alone in your car. The traffic lights are familiar, the road looks the same, and yet, somewhere inside, a very subtle emptiness gently opens. Or maybe it's just an ordinary evening, nothing dramatic, no specific reason. Just a room that feels quieter than usual, and the realization that you're truly alone with your own thoughts. You're not intentionally thinking about anyone. You're not digging through the past. And yet, somehow, an old image slowly returns. A sentence you thought had long drifted away suddenly becomes clear again. That moment doesn't arrive with blame. It doesn't carry guilt. Just a very small question, almost a whisper within you. Did I really listen? Did I truly notice how they were feeling? For Libra, questions like these rarely come early, because you're someone who's always attentive to balance on the outside. You read the room, you sense the rhythm of relationships. You adjust yourself so things can unfold as smoothly as possible. In many situations, you choose silence not because you don't care, but because you believe silence can preserve harmony. You step back because you don't want to disturb anyone's emotions. But then, there comes a point when that balance begins to tilt gently inward. Not in a dramatic way, just a vague feeling that something within you wants to be acknowledged again. This quiet moment doesn't come to judge the past. It doesn't say you were wrong. It doesn't ask you to fix anything right away. It simply invites you to pause and to listen to yourself, to listen to the emotions that may have been overlooked while you were busy keeping everything stable, to listen even to the things that were never spoken, not out of fear, but because you trusted that everything would eventually find its balance. In this moment, Libra begins to notice something very subtle. Sometimes, outer balance is created by setting your own feelings aside. And that isn't wrong, but it isn't the only way. This quiet moment appears when you're mature enough to look back without needing to defend yourself. When you can observe the past not through the eyes of someone who wants to be right, but through the heart of someone who wants to understand. To understand that every choice carries impact. To understand that silence has its own voice. To understand that sometimes doing nothing can leave a deeper mark than we realize. And there is nothing frightening about that awareness, because this moment doesn't come to make you weaker. It arrives when you're steady enough to face yourself with a little more gentleness. For Libra, this is the beginning of a new kind of balance. A balance measured not only by how others around you feel, but by where you truly stand in your own story. That quiet moment, so soft, yet powerful enough to open an entirely different path. And that's where awareness begins to shift. Real change rarely begins with a big decision. More often, it starts with a different way of seeing. You don't blame yourself. You don't try to replay the story just to prove that you were right. There is no inner courtroom. No verdict being delivered. Only a pause long enough for you to look back without needing to defend yourself. Awareness begins to shift when you stop asking, "Who was right?" and replace it with a softer, more human question. If I were in their place, how would I feel? That question doesn't demand an immediate answer. It simply opens a door, and once that door opens, you begin to notice details you once overlooked. Not because you didn't care, but because you were used to prioritizing shared peace. Libra often lives with a strong intuition for atmosphere. You sense tension even before anyone speaks. You know when to step back. You know when silence might keep things from going too far. But that same sensitivity sometimes makes you forget that your silence is also a choice, and every choice carries an impact. When awareness shifts, You don't look back at the past to assign blame. You look back to understand the connection between your actions and someone else's feelings. You begin to realize that sometimes silence isn't received as respect, but as distance. Sometimes keeping the peace leaves the other person feeling as though they're speaking alone. These realizations don't arrive all at once. They move slowly, like morning light slipping through a curtain. You don't change the way you live overnight. You simply begin to observe yourself more carefully. You notice how you listen. You notice the moments when you're about to speak and then stop. You notice the feeling inside when you choose safety over honesty. And in that process, you begin to understand something important. Libra is not indifferent. You've simply grown used to carrying the responsibility of keeping the space around you balanced. You're the one who smooths things over, the one in the middle, the one who doesn't want anyone to get hurt. But as awareness shifts, you begin to wonder whether you've been quietly placing your own feelings outside the conversation. This change doesn't make you harder, it makes you more honest with yourself. You realize that listening to others doesn't mean erasing yourself. Keeping the peace doesn't require constant silence. And true empathy sometimes needs clear presence. Awareness shifts when you allow yourself to feel more, instead of only adjusting. You stop asking only, "Is everyone okay?" and begin to ask as well, "Am I truly here?" That's when a new kind of balance starts to form, not loudly, not dramatically. Oh, just a subtle shift in the way you see the world and the way you stand within your relationships. For Libra, this is the transition from holding balance for others to sharing emotional responsibility in a healthy way. You don't carry it for them. You don't avoid it. You simply begin to show up, more clearly, more honestly. And from this small shift, a deeper journey slowly begins to unfold. A journey into the things that were never spoken. When awareness has already begun to shift, you no longer see only what happened. You start to notice what never did. The words that sat right at the edge of your lips, but were held back. The responses that could have clarified everything, replaced instead by a familiar silence. Not because you didn't care, not because you were trying to avoid anything. In that moment, you simply believed silence was the safest choice. Libra often carries a deep belief that things will settle on their own if no one pushes them further. That time will soften emotions. That harmony can be preserved without saying everything out loud. But later, when you look back, you begin to feel a space that's difficult to name. Not a clear sadness, not a specific anger, just the sense that something was left unfinished. You begin to notice very small traces, a moment of avoiding eye contact when the conversation moved into sensitive territory. A shorter reply than usual, even though there was still so much you wanted to say. A choice to stay silent, not because the feeling was gone, but because you didn't want to make things complicated. Those moments weren't loud, but they left an echo. Not everyone notices it right away. Sometimes, you don't notice it either, at least not then. Only with enough distance do you realize that silence created another kind of distance, one you couldn't see. For Libra, this can feel confusing, because you've always seen yourself as someone considerate, someone who thinks of others, someone willing to adjust so no one feels uncomfortable. But when the unspoken things begin to take shape, you understand that even this sensitivity sometimes comes at a cost. Not because you're unkind, not because you're careless with other people's feelings, but because you've grown so used to holding balance for the entire room that you forgot your own place within it. You're used to standing in the middle, used to listening to both sides, used to being the mediator, the one who softens the tension. And in that role, your emotions are often placed last. The things left unsaid aren't big secrets. They're usually very small, a feeling of being misunderstood, a quiet wish to be heard more fully, a boundary that never quite found its name. But because they're small, they're easy to overlook. And because they're overlooked, they slowly accumulate. When you begin to look back now, it's not to blame yourself for staying silent. It's to understand why silence felt like the right choice at the time. Maybe you thought people would just understand. Maybe you believed the feelings would pass. Maybe you valued shared peace more than personal clarity. Those reasons aren't wrong. They simply reflect someone who genuinely wants harmony. But in this moment, you begin to ask, very gently, what if I also had a place in that conversation? What if my feelings were set on the table too? What might change? These questions don't demand immediate action. They simply open a new space in awareness, a space where you allow yourself to admit that silence isn't always neutral, that sometimes it carries a message you never intended to send. And when you recognize that, a different kind of softness begins to form. Not so you speak more, but so you speak at the right moments, not to disrupt harmony, but to make connection more honest. The things left unsaid, when seen with understanding, no longer feel like a burden. They become an invitation to show up more fully in the connections that matter to you. And from here, a very quiet kind of maturity begins to approach. This moment doesn't send you into panic. It doesn't make your heart race, and it doesn't force you to make a decision right away. Instead, it draws you inward, not into sadness, but into a deeper kind of stillness, like water after the wind has passed, when the surface settles, and you can finally see the bottom. Little by little, you begin to understand that growth rarely arrives through major turning points. It comes through very small things, very quiet things that are easy to miss unless you're truly paying attention. Growth is not about going back to fix the past, not about making up for anything, or proving that you've changed, and not about forcing yourself to fit into any rigid version of what's right. Growth in this moment is simply becoming aware of the impact you carry, aware that every time you show up, every time you listen or choose silence, you leave a feeling behind in the shared space between people. Not so you take responsibility for other people's emotions, but so you understand your role within that connection. For Libra, this is a very subtle transformation. You don't suddenly become someone else. You're still gentle, still thoughtful, still attentive to the emotions around you. But something shifts. You begin to listen more, not just with your ears, but with your full presence. You no longer listen just to calm the situation. You listen to truly understand where the other person is in their emotional world. And in that process, you begin listening to yourself as well. You notice small reactions inside, a slight tightening, a quiet urge to speak, a boundary slowly taking shape. Growth becomes quiet when your responses grow clearer, but never sharp. No more vague answers just to let things pass. No more nodding along when something inside still feels unsettled. Your clarity still carries the softness people know you for, but now it has the depth of honesty. You learn to speak not to confront, but to connect at the right place. You learn to be more real in your relationships, not by saying more, but by being fully there, present when conversations become difficult, present when emotions feel uncomfortable, present even when you don't have the perfect words. And most importantly, you're not doing this to please anyone, not to become a better version in someone else's eyes, not to be seen as the one who always understands. You do it so you don't unintentionally leave someone feeling unseen, and so you don't quietly abandon yourself. Growth stays quiet when you realize you don't have to hold everything in balance alone. Every relationship is a shared space. Every conversation has two sides. And real harmony doesn't come from one person constantly giving way. It comes from meeting in the middle, where both people are seen. For Libra, this isn't a change of who you are. It's a return to a deeper version of yourself, someone who loves the beauty of balance and also understands that true balance includes clarity and honesty. This inward pause doesn't mark the end of anything. It marks a ripening that allows you to step into a new chapter, where you no longer just keep things peaceful, but begin building connections with depth, with space, and with room for every emotion to exist. And from this very quiet growth, a new kind of balance is slowly taking shape. When growth has settled in long enough, you realize you don't need to return to the past to fix everything. There's no need to rewrite the old story. No need to explain what's already gone. All that's needed is to keep moving forward, but to move with a new awareness that's quietly changing the way you show up. This new balance doesn't arrive as an announcement. It isn't declared, it's felt. You begin to see that real balance isn't about everyone being okay, and it isn't about every surface staying smooth. True balance is when every emotion has a place, the easy ones and the ones that are harder to name, the things that are spoken and the things still learning how to find their voice. At this stage, Libra no longer tries to keep everything fine at all costs. You allow imperfection to exist without treating it as failure. You understand that peace isn't always the same as silence, and calm isn't always the same as avoidance. From what you've lived through, you begin to learn very subtle truths. You learn that honesty doesn't break peace. In fact, honesty, when spoken with respect, often gives peace deeper roots. You learn that boundaries don't weaken connection. They simply clarify where you stand and where the other person stands, so neither of you crosses over unintentionally. And you learn that clarity is a very healthy form of love, not a love that's loud, not something put on display, just clear enough that no one is left guessing. A new balance begins to take shape when you choose to say what needs to be said, not out of obligation, but because you respect the relationship enough not to let it drift in uncertainty. Your voice stays soft, your approach stays gentle. You don't need to become rigid to be heard. You only need to show up with your own clarity. You realize that speaking doesn't automatically cause harm. Silence isn't always protection, and avoidance isn't always kindness. There are moments when one well-timed sentence can keep a relationship from drifting further apart. And there are moments when a gently placed boundary allows both people to breathe more easily. This new balance doesn't strip away your Libra nature. On the contrary, it brings you closer to it. A Libra who listens deeply, but also listens inward, who considers carefully without trading away their presence, who values harmony without turning themselves into someone standing on the sidelines. At this point, you no longer feel the need to do the right thing for everyone. You allow relationships to breathe through truth, through boundaries, through clarity. And what's interesting is this: when you stop trying to hold balance on your own, things begin to balance themselves more naturally. Not because someone else changed completely, but because you changed the way you stand within the connection. This new balance isn't built by controlling emotions, but by respecting them. You don't push emotions away. You don't let them carry you off course. You let them be there, seen, named, placed where they belong. For Libra, this is a very quiet kind of freedom. Freedom from pleasing everyone. Freedom from keeping everything gentle at all times. Freedom to show up as yourself, without causing harm to others. And when this new balance becomes steady enough, you begin to sense something very subtle, yet very real. Connection no longer feels as fragile as before, because it no longer rests on silence, but is built on clear, honest presence. From here, a very personal message is slowly taking shape. If you're a Libra and you find yourself moving through this moment, allow yourself to pause for just a while, not to analyze, not to draw conclusions, only to recognize that you're standing at a very meaningful point in your own journey. You're not too late, and you're not behind anyone else. You're simply right on time to understand more deeply, to understand yourself and the way you touch other people's worlds. This awareness isn't here to weigh you down. It doesn't demand immediate change. It doesn't ask you to repair everything that came before. It arrives as a gentle reminder. You can live more truthfully while still holding on to the softness that's always been yours. For Libra, that kind of honesty doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need force. It doesn't need proof. It only needs to be clear enough that you don't have to guess where you stand in each relationship, and clear enough that others don't have to wonder how you truly feel. You may not say everything. You may still choose silence in many moments, but this time, the difference is simple. Silence is no longer avoidance. It's a conscious choice. You begin to understand that not every distance is a loss, not every boundary is separation, and not every truth causes harm. You start to believe that lasting connections aren't built through constant self-sacrifice, but through the full presence of both sides. If something changes after this journey, it likely isn't the world around you. It's the way you stand within it. You stand more grounded now, not because you've grown harder, but because you've stopped placing yourself off to the side. You allow yourself a place in the conversation. You allow your emotions to be named. You allow yourself to no longer be the one who always smooths everything over. And strangely enough, when you stop trying to hold everything in balance alone, relationships begin to feel lighter. Not because someone else changed completely, but because you change the way you show up. Sometimes just a very small shift, A clearer sentence, a gently placed boundary, a moment where you choose to stay with your own feelings, is enough to make the space between two people easier to breathe in. For Libra, this isn't the end of a journey. It's the point where you begin to live more slowly, but more deeply. Deeper in listening, deeper in connection, and deeper in self-respect. If you're hearing these words, remember this. You don't need to become someone else to have healthier relationships. You only need to become a more present version of yourself. And from there, the balance you've always been seeking no longer has to be maintained. It forms naturally, from within.